I want to jump to this story from the Daily Mail. We're talking about anarcho-tyranny. We're talking about the justice system no longer bringing justice. Innocent people being locked up and the machine being weaponized against the Democrats weaponizing the system against political opponents. But here's what I think could actually lead to actual revolution or civil war. Moody's cuts credit ratings of 10 U.S. banks and warns 6 more could face a similar fate. But firm insists U.S. banking system is not broken. This is disconcerting considering what happened with Silicon Valley Bank and several other banks earlier this year. But we also have this from Timcast.com. U.S. credit card debt hits record $1 trillion. Total U.S. household debt tops $17 trillion as Americans turn to debt to cover living expenses. Do you know what the one thing, there's a few things that precipitate civil war and revolution. You know what the simplest is? The most obvious and simplest catalyst for governmental breakdown?
Inflation would be my guess.
No food.
Oh, run out of food. Yeah.
When people are unable to buy food, we saw it in the Arab Spring. You see it in the French Revolution. It's not absolute, but typically when people struggle to make ends meet, they become angry and desperate. And when they're hungry, nothing else matters. So right now, maybe it's a little preliminary. We're seeing corporate and governmental collapse. We're seeing our institutions decay. We're seeing the judicial system decay. We're seeing the Democrats weaponize government against their political rivals. I will say this with absolute certainty that Democrats are cheating in the 2024 election. And what I mean by that is not that there's fraud or they're doing any weird ballot stuff. What they're doing is fairly obvious. They're literally arresting and criminally charging their political opponents. A fair and honest election is when...
They've done it 3 times
That's
already.
Right.
4 next week.
A fair and honest election is when you say, choose me, I'm the best. Don't choose him, he's bad. And the other guy says the same thing. Then people will decide. That's a fair and honest election. What they're doing now is saying, we can't win, so lock him up and prevent him and hobble him in any way possible. That's cheating.
Yeah.
When you take all that into consideration, with the fact that our financial system is whacked out of proportion, there really is a substantial risk with everything going on. And there have been food shortages, especially with COVID and everything, that if the monetary system faces severe turmoil, people can't find houses to live in, people can't afford to pay rent, people can't afford to buy food. You add that into the mix with all the political turmoil and then something kicks off.
Yeah, I mean, not only that, but also there's the concern about inflation and stuff like that, because right now the dollar is only backed by confidence in the government and stuff. So we really do have a historically volatile situation on our hands. We got a couple generations or multiple generations since we've had economic inequality
of this level.
Yeah, at this level. And that's something, whether or not I know that people's material poverty has gone down, but if you've got a society where there's significant difference between the highest earners and the lowest earners and stuff, you do get civil unrest and you get unhappy populations. You've got the changing of the global order when it comes to monetary policy with BRICS and with other, people starting to move away from the dollar. I don't see a whole lot of positive things on the horizon.
Let me double down on that real briefly.
Sick, thanks, man.
Yeah, the Federal Reserve held the federal funds rate at 1/4 point for approximately a decade. Since the Great Recession, they're just like, we're just going to keep it at zero, the zero bound forever. There'll be no problems from that, right? And then we're going to print $5 trillion in the year 2020, and we're going to lock down the economy, create supply chain shortages, which also add to the inflationary pressure. And then in a 12-month period starting in February of 22, they're going to start to hike the Fed funds rate very aggressively, 1/2 point every time they have a meeting. And they're going to take it from 1/4 point up to approximately 5.5, 6, which then takes the mortgage rates from 3.25 and it puts it up to 7.5, 8. It also makes it so that all of these T-bills and these short-term debt instruments that are held on all of these banking institutions, they are now bleeding all over the floor. That's the whole reason that Moody's is marking them down, by the way. It is strictly a Federal Reserve created crisis. I want to be very clear about that. This would not be happening. The American people would not be living off of credit cards and have $1 trillion of debt if it weren't for inflation. That's why all of this is happening.
And let me add to that. This is all politics. I'm surprised this hasn't happened sooner, because an honest evaluation of the way our banks are regulated, the decider about whether a bank is solvent is a political appointee in the Biden administration. And so all these decisions are political. The Silicon Valley Bank, that decision to shut that bank down was a political decision made as a result of lobbying by Democrats.
Yes.
And then the bank here on the East Coast that was subsequently shut down, Signature, that bank was perfectly fine, but they didn't like the fact that they were in the business of crypto. And they told them that, and that's the reason they were shut down. We knew from the 2008 shutdowns, because we got the documents, Judicial Watch did. They didn't know why they were shutting the banks down. They just didn't have a systematic way of shutting banks down or doling out financial support for the banks. It was, well, we want everyone to get the support so no one knows who the bad banks are. So the good banks should get money and the bad banks should get money, and we'll disguise who the bad banks are by making everyone else take the subsidy. It was completely political. The same goes with the Fitch knocking down our credit rating here in the United States. It's politics.
Yep.
It's politics. We've got politicians who have decided that printing money is, and it's politicians of both parties, the best way they can stay in power is to print money, and they don't care what the consequences
it's to
are.
buy
And
votes.
that's right. Transferring wealth,
Chicken in every pot.
And so on top of the increase as they were increasing interest rates, they kept the spigot flowing in terms of spending at the government level. And, there's no sign that it's going to be curtailed.
No.
It's not going to be curtailed. So now we're all supposed to be excited. They've increased, they've cut down our salaries by 4 or 5%, practically speaking, our spending power over the last year. And now we're supposed to be satisfied that we've lost that purchasing power, that they've been cemented, the prices have been cemented at a higher level. They're not getting lower. They're just not getting as high as quickly as they previously did. So, there's no easy way out for this, but there is, other than curtailing government spending, taking politics out of the regulation of the banking industry, meaning the government's got to get, spend a little less money trying to effectively tell everyone that we will insure all deposits, as opposed to making sure that banks that make bad decisions go the way of the dodo bird.
I keep thinking that maybe we could default on the debt to the Federal Reserve, or at least the interest to the Federal Reserve, and be like, suck it. But that's like telling the Swiss bank, the Bank for International Settlements, suck it. And would they then excommunicate the United States from the liberal economic order if we did something?
Probably.
It's not that hard. You just need to change the trajectory just a little bit. And for small government people, it's disappointing because we can spend a whole lot of money if we just change the trajectory. Not too much as far as, conservatives would be, but in terms of like Social Security and government spending, just change the trajectory just a little bit. And it allows the government to spend money virtually world without end forever. But they don't even want to do that.
Well, what's so frustrating is like literally a 10% cut across the board, and we could balance the budget pretty quickly because they take in so much in tax receipts. And it's like, do you think that there's not 10% in excess spending in every federal department? Like, yeah, I'm sure there is. Just look at the war in Ukraine. Look at where all those billions are going. Like, you think they can't cut 50% of that and still get the same bang for their buck? It's just an absurdity. But I want to like really emphasize to the conservative audience that's listening right now, it's incumbent upon you guys to understand that it is Federal Reserve policy that is making it so challenging to have household formation, to get married, to have kids. All of these things that you guys consistently lament, you miss the biggest factor, is that inflation has forced both parents into the workforce, and it has made it incredibly and increasingly challenging to be a parent, to get married, to buy a home. All of these things are Federal Reserve policy.
But
Only the government can do this type of
That's a
damage.
large component of it, but cultural issues.
Of course, it's very important too. Yes.
It's hand in hand.
I think cultural is the bigger
Those
issue.
central banks, they're all kind of controlling and manipulating the media, which is manipulating the culture because why are people not more up in arms about the Federal Reserve? If you knew that private bank was disrupting your life, you would have taken it back 100 years ago.
I would hope.
If we did not ever have the revolution in the workplace, women stayed at home, it wouldn't matter what the Federal Reserve tried to do. Women would not.
But that
It's
coincides with the inception of the Federal Reserve. 1913, you have the women's liberation. They start to hit the workforce. I think it's all part and parcel of the same dynamic.
Sure. But I mean, the cultural change has to happen first.
Maybe. I think one chases the other. It's like it's not necessarily a
Yeah, World War I got people really, really culturally messed up right after the Federal Reserve was ready to go.
Yep.
Like,
You got know-nothing politicians sitting at the knobs trying to manage the economy. They don't know what they're doing. And things get out of whack now and again because they don't know what they're doing. I mean, I remember in 2008, I read in the Wall Street Journal when they first started giving money to the banks. The banks said to the Wall Street Journal, well, they didn't give us a choice. I said, well, isn't that interesting? So we sued, Judicial Watch sued for the records. Long story short, they said, we got the records. We want to meet with the top 9 banks. Bring them into the Treasury Department. And the chief of staff is like, okay, who were the top 9 banks? So they didn't even know who the top 9 banks were. So they bring him in, the heads of the top banks of the United States of America, and they said to them, we're going to give you subsidy. And you should know that if you don't want to take it, we're going to make it so that your regulators require you to do so. And they made them sign little permission forms, 2 or 3 lines. I agree. Jamie Dimon, agree to take $12 billion, whatever, contingent on approval from the board of directors. That's how they, quote, bailed out the banks. And it was never a bailout. It's a takeover.
Yeah,
Every time you hear about bailing out banks, substitute the word takeover, and you understand why we're in the state we are.
You can watch The Big Short is a movie that is really good that covers this kind of stuff, and also Too Big to Fail was another one. Too Big to Fail was kind of the crisis from the government's perspective, and The Big Short was like 3 or 4 different groups of people that actually kind of saw the housing crisis coming and what it would do to the whole economy. Go ahead. Actually, you know better than I do. You would. Go.
Well, yeah. I mean, I was a mortgage lender, so I came out of college right into the teeth of that, and it was a nightmare. And fortunately, we've gotten past that. But there was actually a bailout with Silicon and the other bank that I'm blanking on right now, Signature, in January of this year, and they created a very similar lending vehicle. People don't even know about this, but because of what I just described, where the Fed funds rate was escalated, and they had all of these, short-term debt instruments that were ultimately upside down, they created a short-term lending vehicle that was only on offer to banks that had it was never given explicitly, but based off of my analysis, it was any bank that had over $200 billion in cash on hand or deposits or money under management. And so basically what that means is that if you are banking with an institution that's mid-size or massive, then your deposits north of $250,000 are insured. If you are banking and depositing with a bank that has less than $200 billion, so that's your mom and pop bank. Those are the banks that we would probably us people would like to do business with. Now our deposits aren't insured with them. So what does that mean? It drives all of us in this room to make the calculation that it's actually more prudent for me to bank with this scumbag Jamie Dimon than it is to bank with this mom and pop down the street. That is a terrible mismanagement of the economy, and it is not accidental. It is ultimately the reason that Mercola got debanked, the reason that the entire social credit score system is coming. They want us in the biggest banks because the biggest banks are willing to debank us if we don't go along.
That's right.
With
it's easier to control if you've only got 5 banks as opposed to 3,000 banks. What would you rather do as a dumb government regulator who wants to tell everyone to do?
Thanks for watching this clip from the Timcast IRL podcast. Hang out with us live Monday through Friday at 8 p.m. and become a member over at timcast.com for uncensored, members-only shows exclusive. Thanks for hanging out, and we'll see you all next time.